If there were a simple process that would take only a few minutes and it would decrease your feelings of anxiety, your feelings of stress, your feelings of depression, of overwhelm, of exhaustion, feeling burnt out, your feelings of fear, would you do it? In order to understand this process, though, I think we need to go back to the beginning, back to the point where we understand how our body and our brain processes emotions. Summarizing the Harvard neuroscientist Jill Bolte Taylor, she says we are emotional beings that also think. What this means is that we start with our emotions and then we use our big human brains to process that information. If we think about early human, this makes sense. If we are an early human, we're sitting out in the wilderness and we hear and see a rustling in the bush next to us. Right, so our eyes can see the movement of the bushes and our ears can hear the rustling of the bushes. Our immediate response is danger. And this sort of thinking kept us alive. If we were to just sit there and see that rustling and hear that rustling and didn't think something like danger, we might get eaten by a bear. So let's take a look at what's happening in the body and brain when we see that rustling, hear that rustling, and then we think danger. So again, we have that sensory information coming into our eyes of seeing the rustling. We have the sensory information in our ears from hearing the rustling. Maybe there's other sensory information that we can feel or that we're taking in. And this goes into our brains. It goes into our reptilian portion of our brain. And this is also our emotional portion of our brain. And again, we immediately mark this as danger. And this is a survival mechanism. As soon as our brain reads this as danger, which is, again, our default, what it's going to do is start sending out messages. One of these hormones that you may have heard of is cortisol, which is considered our stress hormone. So this is sent out along with other hormones throughout the body, preparing us for fight or flight. So it's doing things like increasing our heart rate so that we get more oxygen pumping throughout our body to get to our muscles so that we can either fight or we can run. It also increases our breathing rate so that we get more oxygen into the body, again, to get more oxygen into the blood to get it to our muscles. It also shuts some things down. So one thing that it shuts down is our digestive system. When we're in a situation where we are in danger or perceived danger, we shut down our digestive system because our body says we don't need to digest things. What we need to do right now is we need to get ready to fight or we need to get ready to run. This fight or flight response also shuts down the front portion of our brain. And this is the part of our brain that does our executive functioning and our cognitive skills like learning, self-monitoring, planning, organizing, focusing, concentrating, and working toward a goal. So the reason again for this is because at this moment, if we are in danger of, say, being eaten by a bear, our brain and our body says it's not important that we do things like calculate things or that we learn intricate details about the world around us. Right now, what we need to do is we need to focus on staying alive. This was very helpful for our early human because in this world, we didn't have a lot of executive functioning that we needed to do every day, day in and day out. So our species existed based on this negative bias, this ability to see the world around us. And as we did that, we automatically started off with the premise that it was dangerous. And then we were able to tap into this fight or flight response, which allowed us to either fight or to flight. In this instance, our entire body is getting us ready to do something powerful. So when we do find out that that rustling in the bushes is actually a cute little bunny and not a dangerous bear, then that's when our thinking brain can kick in. Our thinking brain says, look, we're not in danger. And what that does is it shuts down the portion of our brain that's sent all of those stress chemicals to our body. However, just because our brain is no longer sending those stress chemicals doesn't mean we don't still feel stressed. Now, it takes some time for our body to flush out those stress chemicals. You may have experienced this if you've ever been in a near car accident or even something simple like perhaps dropping your cell phone. And that instant, you have this fear, this rush of these hormones, but then when you find out that you didn't actually get in the car accident or your cell phone isn't actually broken, it still takes a minute for that stress to kind of go through your body and to wear off. Typically, the larger the stressor, the longer it takes for our body to push through and get rid of those hormones. So for example, the car accident, it may have been extremely stressful, and so it may take more time. You may feel jittery for a little bit longer, have a little bit of brain fog, and then it takes time for that to wear off. If it's the example of dropping your cell phone, maybe it only takes a minute or two for that to wear off. But now we're back in our low stress mode and of observation mode until the next rustling of the bush. And then immediately our brain is going to go into danger mode, and we're going to go through that process again. So the thing is that we as human beings have not evolved our brain and our body's response since that early human. So as we are existing in our world, our brain, as I've mentioned, has a negative bias. We are constantly on the lookout for what we perceive as danger. Now, in the world today, that danger may or may not be a rustling in the bush. Maybe it is if you're out camping, for example. But our dangers today look different. So our dangers today look like an exam at the end of the week that is important to you. Or it may look like a family, a friend, or yourself being ill. It may look like, how are you going to pay the bills? Or how are you going to find work? So we find ourselves today in a situation where nearly every moment of the day, or possibly every moment of the day, we could be perceiving danger. We have that exam at the end of the week that we really need to study for, but we don't know how we're going to find the time to study, or we don't feel comfortable with the material, and so that's causing stress. It's causing danger signals in our brain and our body. Or we have to pay that bill at the end of the month or the beginning of the month, and we don't know how we're going to have the money to pay that bill. So we are constantly perceiving this danger that's right around the corner. And if we again think about the effect of this on our body, that means that every day, each moment, or maybe a large portion of the moments, then our body is flooding itself with these hormones. It's increasing our heart rate, which is increasing our blood pressure. It's increasing our breathing rate, which could cause shortness of breath. And it is shutting down our digestion, which could lead to digestive issues, stomach aches, things like that. And it's also shutting down that front portion of the brain. And remember, that front portion of the brain is where we have our cognitive functions. And so this is leading to things like fogginess, because if our body is in this stress response, then remember, it's saying it's not important for us to be learning right now. It's not important for us to be understanding the details. It's not important for us to have clarity on issues. What we need right now is to put all of that energy into our ability to fight something, to run away from something. So then here we are as a function of our body and our brain trying to protect us. In this world nowadays, what we are ending up having is this brain fog, this constant inability to focus or to concentrate, a difficulty in learning, higher amount of anxiety, this increased stress response that allows us to be on edge and maybe short with our friends and family. It also can cause us to be depressed because our body is struggling to keep up. So we have this kind of down regulation where our body is exhausted and where we're struggling to even have the energy to do the things that we want to do. So what we've been focusing on really is our brain and its messages to the body. But it also works the other way around. So if we have input to our body, then we can change our brains. You may see this, for example, in exercise. So we could be really upset, we could be really down, we could really not be feeling like we want to exercise, or say we really don't want to have to move, and we have to pack up our things and move. And then maybe you'll notice that if you do force yourself to go exercise, or if you do get into this moving process and you're moving your body, it starts to change our emotions or the way we're feeling about something. You might feel a little bit lighter about it. Part of the way through, you start to notice that you're actually enjoying yourself. You're enjoying the nice weather or the animals that you're hearing. But what about those times when we really just can't get ourselves to exercise? We're feeling too exhausted, we're feeling too run down, too brain fogged to do these things. Or let's say we don't have the time to do that, or we don't feel like we have the time to do that. We have responsibilities, we have family responsibilities, or school responsibilities, or work responsibilities. This is where this technique that I want to introduce you to comes in. This process or this technique that I'm talking about is called Emotional Freedom Technique, or EFT. And what this means is that it is freeing up those emotions so that you can have more clarity, so that you can release those hormones, get those hormones to go through the body, and that you can now be focused and more clear and let go of that anxiety or the depression or the overwhelm or the fatigue. So if you've ever been in a state of anxiety or stress, or think about an exam you had to take or these bills, if you tell yourself, if you use your thinking brain and try to tell yourself you need to calm down, you need to decrease the stress, you need to not worry about it, typically that doesn't work. It's really difficult for us to use our brains to calm down that emotional part. But what we can do is we can use our body to then talk to our brain. And this is done by tapping on various points of the body. Now, this is where you may think this is getting a little weird. I don't really understand what you're talking about. Bear with me for a moment, because there are hundreds of scientific papers that have been published and reproduced to show that this technique of reversing this order actually works. In fact, it works so well that the VA clinic uses this technique with veterans that have PTSD, and they have successfully decreased or completely removed their PTSD. So before we get into the details of the technique, how does it work? Recall that when we perceive danger, our brain is sending out all of these hormones, telling us to gear up for fight or flight. What science has shown is that if we put gentle pressure on different points on our body, we can send messages to the brain. And these messages that we're sending is calmness. So think for a minute, sometime maybe when you've been stressed or you've been overwhelmed, if you have put your head in your hands to the point where you kind of are cupping your eyes, you got your palms on your cheeks and your fingertips are on that bone just above your eye, and you kind of rub across that bone over your eye, and you kind of look up and open your eyes again. There are 2 points that you can touch on that portion of your eye. We're actually sending calming messages to our brain. So maybe we have noticed that when we've done that, we feel a little bit better. Now, this technique is taking something as simple as that and being more intentional with it. Science found that there are these different points in the body where when we do touch them, they send a calming message to the brain. And what we can do is we can reprogram this stress response. We can tell our brains, hey, look, I know that you're perceiving danger, and that makes sense because our ancestors needed to perceive this danger all the time. However, this is not helpful for me right now, and I'm going to tap on and touch these points on the body. That's going to send this message to the brain saying, we're okay, we're calm, and we're not in danger. So the key and interesting piece here is that we don't actually have to feel calm. We don't actually have to feel like we're not in danger. Our brain is sending this message. And again, if we tell ourselves with our thinking brain, hey, it's okay, you're not in danger, it doesn't work. But if we tap on these points and we literally send electrical messages through our nervous system up to the brain, which is what we're doing scientifically, it's reprogramming those portions of the brain to tell them that we are calm, even though our thinking brain and our whole physiology right now is telling us that we are not. And this is really important because science has found that the more we have this stress response, the more we're sending these messages and we're perceiving danger, the more the fear centers and the stress centers in our brain grow. We actually grow more brain tissue in those areas of fear and in those areas of stress. And the portion of our brain that is associated with calm and with understanding and clarity, including this front part of our brain that has our cognitive functions, actually decreases. We take away brain cells from those areas. We put that energy into areas that we use more often, similar to using muscles. So if we're using our muscle for fear and for stress more often than we're using our muscle for calm and for clarity and for focus and for learning, then our body is going to react in kind. So then, of course, what we need to do is reverse this. We need to build up those areas in our brain that are associated with calm and with relax so that we can get back to that focus, so that we can get back to that energy that we have and that we need in order to learn and in order to function appropriately within our world. And so tapping on these points in our body is going to send that message to our brain. If we learn to tap on these points and we send a message saying, no, we're okay. We're okay. There's not a bear right here that's going to eat us. We need to have that clarity and we need to have that calm, then that shuts that portion of that brain down appropriately. Of course, it will be useful and it will be available when we actually do need it. But for that time being, it's going to send that message to our brain that says we're okay right now. So it'll shut that down and it'll actually reprogram it to where when we say experience that thing again, if we think about that exam coming the next week, we'll actually have a lesser fear response or a lesser stress response. And the more and more we reprogram or the more and more we tap on these points as we're having that stress response, the more and more we reprogram our brain to not see that that as a stress response. Our brain no longer perceives that thing as a dangerous thing, and instead we stay calm, we stay focused, and we have clarity, which of course in my example of the test at the end of the week is going to be immensely important for your learning, for your clarity during the exam. So now that we've talked about the process, we've talked about how it works and why it works, I just want to end on one note. Oftentimes it seems that when we are stressed out, when we're anxious, when we're overwhelmed, and then even when we have this brain fog or we're fatigued, we often have a sense of guilt that comes along with it. We say we should be doing better, we should remember where our keys are, we shouldn't be so stressed about this, or we shouldn't be short with our friends or our family. But really, I'd like to tell you that this is not your fault. And this is an important piece, because if we continue to beat ourselves up, if we continue to feel guilty about these things, it only continues the process, right? Because guilt would be something that we would see as dangerous, right? We don't want to have guilt. And so this makes us feel even worse, and that continues to send those chemicals throughout the body. I would like you to consider that this really is not your fault, that us as humans, we are wired to see the world around us as dangerous, to keep us alive, and that it's not your fault that you see that bill coming up as dangerous or that exam coming up as dangerous. That's how our species has existed throughout these generations. So really, I suggest you give yourself a break and you say, look, my brain is designed to function in this way. It's designed to see all of these things as dangerous and to flood my body with these hormones for survival. And don't feel guilty about it, because it isn't your fault. What you can do, however, is you can change that process. And some of us, based on our childhood, based on the environment that we grew up in, are actually more wired for stress. We have more receptors for those stress hormones in our body than others do. So there's no sense in comparing your stress level to another person's stress level. You can work from that point that it's not your fault, and what you can then do is you can turn it around and you can reprogram your brain and your body so that you can better handle whatever your body and your brain perceives as stressful. Stop beating yourself up, stop having any guilt, stop feeling bad for what your brain is programmed to do, and then you can change that program and you can build up those centers of calm, of clarity, and start rebuilding those brain cells in your frontal lobe that allow you to function even better and decrease those fear centers, decrease those areas that perceive these things as fearful. And if we can do that, then you can be better for everybody around you and for your own life.